progress.
All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Charles Allen. I am the Ward 6 Council member and chair of the Council's Committee on Transportation and the Environment. Today is Tuesday, May 23rd, 2023, and we're convening virtually over the Zoom platform. The time is now 10:33 a.m., and I'm calling to order this public roundtable of committee. Today's roundtable is going to focus on the issue of traffic enforcement in the District of Columbia, which by many metrics is failing the millions of residents and visitors that are using our roadways. Yesterday, we saw an arrest in the March crash on Rock Creek Parkway that killed 3 people. You might remember that when that crash happened, many people on Twitter quickly noted that the car was associated with more than $12,000 in unpaid tickets for speeding and running red lights, including 44 tickets in the 10 months before the crash. The driver was fleeing park police when they killed 3 people. And yesterday, local media reported the driver also had been convicted of driving under the influence at least 3 times. She was still on probation for the most recent conviction. And if she had held a license for just about anything else, cosmetics, dentistry, plumbing, a gun perhaps, and she had clearly over and over the course of many years shown a track record for using that license in a way that put the public at risk of serious injury or death without any real evidence that her behavior had changed, she would have lost her license long ago. And I'm having a hard time understanding why a driver's license is going to be treated so differently. Last week, it was reported that the district is owed nearly $1.3 billion in unpaid traffic tickets. $1.3 billion. That's about 6.7% of the entire budget we're in the midst of approving for the District of Columbia. And it's more than double the balance of unpaid tickets from just 2 years ago. Now, while those numbers are jaw-dropping, and it's easy to think about all the ways that we could use that money to improve the lives of district residents, it's really not about the dollars. It's about the fact that behind each one of those tickets, and behind the nearly 2 million total photo enforcement and moving violation tickets issued in FY21 and FY22, was risky and dangerous driving of some kind. It could have been speeding, maybe it was running a red light, but it's behavior that puts pedestrians, cyclists, and other motorists at risk. It's the kind of dangerous behavior that all too predictably causes serious injuries and death on our district streets. Last year alone, 35 people were killed in traffic-related death. Until we find ways to change that motorist behavior, traffic deaths are going to persist. And I'll be very clear about why we focus on unpaid tickets. There is an easily accessible public database that shows how many unpaid tickets are associated with a certain license plate. That's it. If there was a database that showed a car was associated with dozens, hundreds of paid tickets for speeding or running red lights, well, that driver would be shamed on Twitter all the same. It's the behavior of dangerous driving, not the fact that someone can't pay the tickets. But unpaid tickets also suggest a perception that there's no consequences for breaking our traffic rules, and that's also deeply concerning. So coming out of today's hearing, I want to find ways to ensure that all dangerous drivers are off our roads, even if you have the means to pay the tickets over and over and over again. To be clear, making progress toward Vision Zero requires more than just enforcement. It requires all 3 E's of roadway safety: engineering, education, and enforcement. And if we want to reduce traffic violence, we have to design our streets in a way that discourages traveling at high speeds and improves visibility. We need to couple those infrastructure improvements with better education to all roadway users about sharing the road. But ultimately, we must also ensure there's meaningful consequence for dangerous driving. That's certainly easier said than done. Designing a penalty that's fair, equitable, and capable of changing behavior is challenging. It's going to require tough conversations around how dangerous driving harms our community. We need to grapple with how law enforcement of any kind can have disparate impacts on communities of color. It's going to require sensitivity to the fact that many people depend on a personal automobile for their livelihoods, and the loss of driving privileges could upend their lives. But we're going to need to grapple with those issues if we want to solve the problem. My hope for today is that we cover a broad range of topics related to traffic enforcement, including how to best utilize and balance the district's automated traffic enforcement, or ATE system, administered by the District Department of Transportation with enforcement by the Metropolitan Police Department. Whether the council should consider reassigning in-person traffic enforcement from MPD to another district agency. How do we ensure there are meaningful consequences for all citations for moving violations, but especially those issued by automated traffic enforcement? What are the barriers to enforcement against both district and out-of-state drivers, including the district's efforts to establish reciprocity agreements with Virginia and Maryland? Whether the district should assess points against a driver for citations issued by the ATE system. And how does the district create a more equitable system of enforcement, including whether fines should be adjusted or waived in certain circumstances, including based on a driver's ability to pay, and what alternatives exist to monetary penalties? As we explore these topics, I hope we remember what's at stake. Inaction is simply not an option. I'm using today's discussion as a springboard for developing legislation to overhaul traffic enforcement in the District of Columbia. With that introduction, we're going to move now to our first panel of witnesses. First couple of housekeeping notes. We have 5 panels of public witnesses scheduled to testify today. Each panelist is going to have the opportunity to give prepared remarks before turning to Q&A. While participation in the roundtable was by invitation only today, members of the public can submit a written statement for the record, which will close on Tuesday, June 5th, 2023. We also will be having future hearings where it will be open to all members of the public. And after our public witnesses, we'll turn to our sole government witness for the day, Deputy Mayor for Operations and Infrastructure, Deputy Mayor Lucinda Babers. So with that, we're first going to begin with Ryan Calder, who is an assistant professor of environmental health and policy at Virginia Tech. I will note for Dr. Calder that it is 12:30 a.m. where he is right now, even though it is 10:30 a.m. where we are. So that's why we're going to have Professor Calder go first to be able to get the advantage of the expertise that he's going to share, and then we'll move on to our other panels who are probably more similar time zones than we are right now. So Professor Calder, I appreciate you joining us from afar, and let me turn to you for your testimony and look forward to a discussion with you.
Thank you for the introduction. So yes, I'm Ryan Calder, Assistant Professor of Environmental Health and Policy at Virginia Tech, and my work characterizes the health impacts of engineered systems and develops tools to improve decision-making in the context of health and economic uncertainties and trade-offs. I would like to first thank the Committee on Transportation and the Environment and Chairperson Allen for organizing a roundtable on traffic safety and for inviting my testimony on this very important issue. The testimony I've prepared will be a summary of a letter I've already sent to all council members on what I believe to be a breakdown in DC's policies around traffic safety, which exacerbates risks to everyone in DC and which also exacerbates inequities in a way that I think has been overlooked in a lot of recent legislative and executive decisions. So this letter was sparked by the widely reported crash that council member Allen recently described, in which Lexus SUV fleeing a traffic stop collided with the Lyft, killing all 3 occupants of the Lyft. We wrote a letter that was co-signed by 9 local organizations, including 5 local families of Families for Safe Streets and over 650 individuals, many of whom were survivors of traffic crashes or loved ones of victims of traffic crashes. Through the extensive use of red light and speed cameras, DC is generating vast amounts of data on vehicles and drivers that pose the greatest risks to life and welfare. There's an extensive literature demonstrating unequivocally that a driver's record of infractions is highly predictive of the probability and magnitude of future crashes. This was exemplified by the Rock Creek Parkway crash, where at the time of the crash, that SUV was associated with 49 separate unpaid violations accrued in less than a year, including multiple citations for exceeding the speed limit by more than 25 miles per hour. DC was compiling the data in real time, showing that this driver was an extreme risk to others. And just yesterday, it was reported that the driver also had a lengthy history of DUIs. By any reasonable measure, the driver and the vehicle should not have been on the road. DC is now relying on speed cameras and traffic cameras for the overwhelming majority of interventions with cars that break traffic laws. However, these tickets have no enforcement mechanism other than the small probability of booting. Prior to this year, outstanding traffic fines would have prevented license renewal, but that law was repealed. Drivers know they can speed through DC with abandon. They will not be pulled over. They do not need to pay tickets from red light or speed cameras. There is no risk of booting if they don't park on public streets, and a very small risk of booting if they do. This problem is exacerbated by the proliferation of expired and counterfeit temporary license plates across the district, which are used to circumvent registration blocks and to evade traffic cameras altogether. In DC, as in the United States as a whole, racialized and lower income communities are at vastly higher risk of traffic violence. In DC, census block groups where at least 75% of the population is Black or African American have had more than double the number of crashes with fatalities or serious injuries as compared to block groups where less than 25% of the population is Black or African American since 2016. Of the 10 census block groups with the highest number of crashes with fatal or serious injuries since 2016, 7 of those 10 are in tracts that are at least 75% Black or African American. Paradoxically, however, equity objectives are most frequently invoked to justify inaction rather than action on traffic safety. For example, equity was cited as a reason not to move forward with recommendations by the fake temporary tag task force or to preserve the link between traffic camera fines and the ability to renew a driver's license. To be clear, this is not primarily about payment or non-payment of fines. It is about a lack of mechanisms to translate data on clear and predictable risks to life and welfare into action in the form of license suspensions, car impoundments, mandatory education, or other appropriate and equitable interventions. In our letter, we describe 1 legislative and 4 executive policy actions that could improve traffic safety. The urgently needed legislative action is a mechanism to link traffic camera data to actual interventions, such as license suspensions or driver education. Meanwhile, DC's existing powers could be more effectively used with better workflows and data flows between executive departments. For example, priority for booting could be assigned based on severity of moving violations. DC should also revive negotiations over reciprocity with Virginia and Maryland, given the large number of drivers from those states who contribute to traffic risks in DC. Finally, it's clear that more action is needed on expired and counterfeit license plates that are used to evade accountability for traffic safety and much else. Thank you.